The Galactic Council expected Earth to surrender in hours. They sent 12 dreadnoughts against a species still burning fossil fuels. What happened next wasn't just a battle. It was a humiliation written in nuclear sub-impacts and repurposed garbage trucks. I watched their entire invasion plan unravel because they forgot one thing. Humans don't fight fair. The first time I saw the Council chamber on Vorthak Prime, I thought I understood power. The room was a cavern of polished obsidian that seemed to swallow sound and light. Yet 47 distinct civilizations managed to communicate through it. Their delegates used bioluminescent patterns that shimmered across their bodies, while telepathic whispers traveled through crystalline conduits embedded in the floor. Each display was meticulously calculated to intimidate observers like me. I documented the proceedings from my observation post, recording every flicker of light and silent exchange. The air hummed with the quiet confidence of beings who had never known defeat. Their assessment of Earth appeared on the central hologram as a single dismissive line. Primitive, fossil fuel dependent, negligible threat. High Priestess Yanival's cranial tendrils pulsed with violet light as she declared the invasion would last hours, not days. She spoke of humanity as one might speak of an insect colony, an inconvenience to be swept aside before the real work began. Her voice carried the weight of millennia of technological superiority, a tone that brooked no argument. General Fax Prime amplified her confidence with military specifics. His dreadnought squadron would subdue the planet before completing their first orbit. He detailed the 12 warships' capabilities: quantum shielding, plasma batteries, tactical foresight algorithms. Each specification was another nail in humanity's coffin. I watched the other delegates' bioluminescent patterns shift to shades of approval and agreement. They saw Earth's combustion engines and primitive nuclear technology as museum pieces, not threats. I recorded their absolute certainty in my logs, noting the complete lack of contingency planning. Their arrogance blinded them to the one possibility that never appeared in their simulations. They never considered that primitive was just a label in their database, not an actual limitation. Their assessment didn't account for human ingenuity, for the way this species repurposed everything from paperclips to orbital debris. That single miscalculation would cost them more than military resources. It would cost them their unquestioned authority, their sense of inherent superiority, their place in the galactic hierarchy. They were about to learn that underestimating humanity wasn't just an error in judgment. It was a catastrophic failure of imagination. The council chamber felt utterly silent then, though it was filled with the subtle communications of nearly 50 advanced species. None of them sensed the approaching storm. Then the first wave hit. 12 dreadnoughts descended on Earth's oceans like falling mountains, breaking through cloud cover with the arrogance of gods visiting a lesser world. Their sensor arrays swept the planet, identifying military installations, population centers, and what they considered remnants of obsolete technology. Their flagship, the Eternal Vanguard, detected a single vessel beneath the waves, a cigar-shaped object moving at barely a fraction of their own speed. The ship's classification database placed it as a marine design abandoned by most spacefaring species, centuries earlier. I noted the tactical officer's dismissive gesture as he logged it as a non-threat, a relic not worth diverting course to avoid. But that cigar-shaped object was the USS Pennsylvania, a nuclear-powered submarine that had undergone modifications the Council's scanners couldn't comprehend. The humans hadn't attempted to replicate energy shields or quantum encryption. Instead, they had welded additional armor plating to the hull and added thrusters meant for orbital supply vehicles. The Pennsylvania's crew didn't bother with electronic countermeasures or evasive maneuvers. They simply pointed their reinforced bow at the Eternal Vanguard's engine housing and accelerated. The impact was a brutal, almost primitive solution to a technological mismatch. No civilized fleet would ever attempt such a tactic. It violated every principle of space combat. There was no elegance to it, no tactical subtlety. Just mass and velocity meeting superior technology head-on. The dreadnought's shields were designed to deflect energy weapons and high-velocity projectiles, not a several thousand-ton submarine moving at close range. The quantum plating held for precisely 3 seconds before the kinetic energy transfer shattered the primary engine housing. I watched the tactical displays as the Eternal Vanguard listed, its power systems failing in cascading alerts. The other dreadnoughts hesitated, their command protocols offering no guidance for this scenario. Their tactical computers contained thousands of battle simulations against plasma cannons and missile barrages, but not a single entry for rammed by obsolete marine vessel. The humans had used the oldest naval tactic in history against the most advanced warship in the quadrant. The Council's first shocking miscalculation was assuming humans would fight by established rules of engagement. They expected technological warfare, not a physics problem solved with blunt force. Their prestige fleet, designed to subdue entire civilizations, was effectively neutralized by a tool they considered centuries out of date. The Pennsylvania's crew radioed a simple message before their submarine broke apart from the impact. "Welcome to Earth." The transmission was unencrypted, clear and utterly incomprehensible to the alien commanders. They couldn't process the concept of a weapon that destroyed itself to prove a point. The Council regrouped after the submarine incident, sending a second wave to establish orbital superiority. Their remaining dreadnoughts took up strategic positions, scanning for military threats. Their sensors identified incoming vessels, but the signatures were wrong. The readings showed objects moving too slow, too small to be warships. Command staff assumed they were civilian craft fleeing conflict zones or perhaps supply vehicles. Their tactical computers registered the approaching objects as low-priority targets, not worth diverting weapon systems to engage. These weren't warships. They were garbage trucks modified with chemical thrusters salvaged from space program test facilities. Each vehicle was a standard terrestrial waste collection unit, its compaction mechanism still functional, its hydraulic systems intact. The humans had simply added propulsion units and basic navigation systems. The modifications were crude but effective, the kind of practical engineering the Council's analysts had dismissed as primitive. The trucks climbed through the atmosphere in clumsy arcing trajectories that defied conventional flight patterns. Their holds weren't filled with munitions. They were packed with kitchen waste, rotting food, and general refuse collected from cities across the planet. The contents had been fermenting for days, creating a biological cocktail that human olfactory systems had learned to tolerate, but alien biology had never encountered. As the trucks approached the dreadnoughts, their operators triggered the compaction systems, pressurizing the cargo holds before releasing the contents through modified discharge chutes. The trucks breached the dreadnought's environmental seals not through technological superiority, but through sheer persistence. They clustered around airlocks and ventilation systems, dumping their contents directly into the ship's atmospheric processors. The putrid cloud spread through corridors and command centers within minutes. Alien crew members began collapsing at their stations, their respiratory and nervous systems overwhelmed by the olfactory assault. Medical teams scrambled to respond, their diagnostic equipment unable to classify the threat. The Council's logic couldn't process a weapon that targeted biological sensitivities rather than structural integrity. Their security protocols contained thousands of countermeasures for energy weapons, kinetic impactors, and electronic warfare, but nothing for odor-based attacks. Ship commanders initially assumed they were under chemical weapons attack, but their sensors detected no toxic compounds, only organic decay products. The situation devolved into chaos as crew members abandoned their posts, vomiting and retching in the corridors. Medical teams declared a code orange for widespread olfactory trauma, a classification that hadn't been used in living memory. The affected ships became unable to maintain basic operations, as their crews became incapacitated by nausea and sensory overload. Commanders had no choice but to order full evacuations, transferring personnel to less contaminated vessels. The Council watched from orbit as their mighty warships were abandoned, not because of battle damage, but because their crews couldn't stand the smell. It was a humiliation written in stench, a tactical defeat achieved through biological warfare of the most unconventional kind. The humans had weaponized their own waste, turning what the Council considered evidence of primitive sanitation into an effective combat tool. Their second wave had failed because they never imagined an enemy would attack their sense of smell rather than their shields. The garbage trucks drifted empty through the formation, their mission complete, their contents having achieved what no advanced weapon system could have accomplished. The third wave was meant to be the Council's masterpiece of aerial dominance. Their elite fighters, the Razor-class interceptors, formed perfect diamond formations high in the atmosphere. Each craft maintained precise distance from the others, their navigation systems synchronized to microsecond accuracy. They moved as a single entity, a display of technological perfection that had subdued dozens of worlds. I watched their tactical displays from the command center, noting the flawless execution of standard deployment protocols. The formation was both a military strategy and a psychological weapon, designed to demonstrate absolute control of the battle space. Then the humans launched what their communications later called the Flying Circus. It was a ragtag collection of aircraft that defied classification. I spotted crop dusters, vintage propeller planes, commercial airliners with their logos painted over, and even what appeared to be motorized gliders. Their approach vectors looked random, almost drunken. They flew in chaotic, unpredictable patterns that made no tactical sense. The Razor formation immediately began to degrade as pilots tried to track multiple erratic targets simultaneously. These machines didn't fire lasers or missiles. They flew directly through the interceptors' attack vectors, forcing evasive maneuvers that broke formation discipline. Two Razors clipped wings trying to avoid a collision with a brightly painted agricultural aircraft. The human pilots seemed to treat the engagement as some kind of aerial dance rather than combat. Their radio communications were filled with casual banter and laughter, completely at odds with the tense military chatter from the Council forces. Then they did something the Council's computers couldn't parse. The larger aircraft began emitting thick contrails in precise patterns, using their exhaust to write against the sky. The words formed slowly at first, then hung in the stratosphere as a complete message. Go home, not today, and your mom. The rest? The syntax was garbled, the meaning unclear, but the intent was unmistakable. It was simultaneously a taunt, a warning, and a cultural statement that made no sense to the Council's linguists. The Razor pilots hesitated, their attack algorithms offering no guidance for dealing with psychological warfare delivered via skywriting. Formation discipline collapsed completely as pilots stared at the message, trying to decipher its meaning. The human aircraft took advantage of the confusion, weaving through the disordered interceptors with what seemed like reckless abandon. Several more collisions occurred as Council pilots overcorrected, trying to avoid the unpredictable movements. It was a culture shock delivered at 60,000 feet, a weaponization of misdirection and sheer audacity. The humans had turned a military engagement into a performance, treating war as theater rather than a contest of force. Their unorthodox approach exploited the Council's reliance on predictability and protocol. The message slowly dissipated in the upper atmosphere, but its impact lingered in the confused communications between the scattered interceptors. The third wave had failed, not because of technological inferiority, but because the humans refused to play by any recognizable rules of engagement. The Council deployed their ultimate weapon, the Phantom Squadron. 12 ships with perfect cloaking technology descended through the atmosphere, their surfaces bending light and energy around them until they became virtually undetectable. These vessels represented the pinnacle of galactic stealth engineering, capable of slipping past any military sensor network ever documented. I watched their progress on the tactical displays, noting how their signature remained at 0 across all conventional detection spectra. The Council commanders relaxed visibly, confident that this finally represented an insurmountable technological advantage. Their previous failures would be erased by this demonstration of superior capability. But the humans didn't use military sensors. They used weather radar. Their response to the invisible threat was to activate civilian meteorological networks across the planet. Thousands of ground-based stations began broadcasting standard weather monitoring pulses, the same technology humans used to track precipitation systems and atmospheric conditions. The Council's tactical officers initially dismissed the activity as irrelevant background noise, another example of primitive technology functioning beneath their notice. Their most advanced stealth was defeated by a system designed to track rain and snow. The Phantom ships, while invisible to targeted scanning, still displaced air molecules and created minute atmospheric disturbances. The weather radar systems detected these subtle changes as anomalous pressure fronts. The ancient human insight was breathtakingly practical. If it affects the weather, radar sees it. Their solution wasn't to develop better cloaking detection, but to repurpose existing infrastructure for a completely different application. The Phantom ships became visible as shimmering distortions on civilian weather networks. Weather forecasters across the planet began reporting strange atmospheric phenomena on their public broadcasts. Television meteorologists pointed to swirling patterns on their radar displays that shouldn't exist under current conditions. Social media filled with images of weather maps showing odd formations moving against wind patterns. The humans had turned their entire population into a distributed detection network without firing a single weapon. Operation Snowball Fight commenced within hours of the first radar sightings. Cargo planes modified for atmospheric seeding operations took off from airfields across the planet. Their holds were filled not with weather modification chemicals, but with industrial-grade flour and biodegradable glitter. They flew predetermined grid patterns based on the weather radar data, releasing their payloads into the areas showing atmospheric anomalies. The invisible warships were coated as they passed through the clouds of particulate matter. The flour and glitter adhered to their energy-bent surfaces, outlining their shapes against the sky. What had been perfect stealth vessels became visible as sparkling flour-dusted outlines moving through the air. Their aura of invincibility evaporated under a cloud of mundane particulates. The Phantom Squadron commanders reported their sudden visibility with a mixture of shock and disbelief. Ground observers began taking photographs and videos of the outlined ships. Children pointed at what looked like giant glittery ghosts moving across the sky. The Council's elite force had been neutralized by a tactic borrowed from a child's game. Their perfect technology had been defeated by household ingredients and a simple understanding of how to make the invisible visible. The Phantom Squadron withdrew in disgrace. Their advanced cloaking systems rendered useless by flour and glitter. With their fleet in disarray, the Council's flagship, the Eternal Dominion, remained. It hung in geostationary orbit like an unblinking eye, its quantum plating reflecting the planet's curvature below. The ship was a fortress of layered energy shields and redundant systems, considered untouchable by any known weapon. Its command staff monitored the chaos below with calm detachment, confident that while the smaller engagements might be unconventional, their flagship represented an order of magnitude difference in capability. They had watched the submarine collision, the garbage truck assault, the aerial circus, and the flour and glitter debacle with increasing bewilderment, but never genuine concern. The Eternal Dominion was their bedrock, their final argument against this planet's stubborn resistance. Then a single foil-wrapped craft ascended from the planet. It was makeshift, almost comical in its construction. The vehicle appeared to be assembled from discarded satellite parts, rocket booster segments, and what looked like standard terrestrial automotive components. Silver thermal insulation blankets covered most of its surface, giving it the appearance of a poorly wrapped parcel. It moved with jerky, uncertain motions, its propulsion systems clearly mismatched and improvised. The Council's tactical officers initially classified it as space debris or perhaps a failed civilian launch. Not worth their attention. Its pilot was Captain Jake Martinez, a man whose personnel file, later recovered from planetary databases, listed his profession as pizza delivery driver. His flight credentials consisted of commercial aviation experience and what appeared to be extensive hours in vehicle simulation games. He wore a modified flight suit over what looked like standard delivery uniform pants. His control console included a navigation system that still showed terrestrial mapping data and a thermal container secured in the co-pilot's seat. He didn't fire a weapon. He performed a delivery run. The foil-wrapped craft approached the Eternal Dominion on a shallow trajectory, its course erratic but deliberate. Council defense systems tracked the object but registered no weapon signatures, no hostile intent patterns. The craft came within meters of the flagship's primary hull, close enough that its improvised thrusters scorched the quantum plating. Martinez executed what appeared to be a practiced maneuver, grazing the hull with a protruding antenna array. The scratch was microscopic, barely visible even under magnification, a thin line etched into the perfect surface no deeper than a human hair. But the symbolic impact was galactic. The Eternal Dominion's flawless defensive record had been breached, not by superior technology, but by what amounted to a precision nuisance. Damage control teams scrambled to assess the mark, their instruments confirming the trivial physical impact, even as their command structure grappled with the implications. The stunning line echoed through their command channels. A pizza delivery driver defeated our flagship. Officers repeated it in disbelief, the words seeming to short-circuit their understanding of military engagement. Their entire hierarchy of threat assessment, their classification systems, their careful protocols, all rendered meaningless by a man who treated their pinnacle warship like a difficult-to-reach address. It was the hinge moment, the point where invincibility became a joke. The Council's technological superiority meant nothing against an opponent who refused to acknowledge the rules of conventional warfare. Martinez's audacity redefined what war meant in the galaxy, transforming it from a contest of force to a theater of psychological assertion. He had treated their greatest achievement as a delivery destination, their impenetrable shields as a minor obstacle to be navigated around. Human creativity and brazenness had scratched the pinnacle of their technology, proving that innovation mattered more than raw power. The foil-wrapped craft drifted away from the Eternal Dominion, its mission accomplished, its pilot already preparing for the next phase of his unconventional campaign. The scratch remained on the hull, a permanent reminder that the Council's understanding of conflict needed fundamental revision. Martinez didn't retreat after his attack run. He requested docking clearance on the same channel the Council used for diplomatic communications. His transmission was clean, professional, and utterly unexpected. The Council command staff, still reeling from the symbolic scratch on their hull, processed the request through standard protocols. Their systems identified the foil-wrapped craft as a non-military vessel, categorizing the approach as potentially diplomatic. They expected a surrender negotiation, perhaps a plea for mercy from a defeated species. Their arrogance blinded them to the possibility that this might be anything other than capitulation. He approached the Eternal Dominion not as a conqueror, but as a delivery man. His craft maneuvered toward the primary docking bay with the careful precision of someone navigating city traffic. I watched from the observation deck as the outer doors cycled open, accepting the strange vessel into their sanctum. The contrast was almost comical, the gleaming, technologically perfect docking bay, receiving what looked like a salvaged collection of spare parts wrapped in thermal insulation. He cycled through the airlock, carrying a thermal bag. The inner door hissed open to reveal a man in a modified flight suit, his posture relaxed, his expression neutral. "Afternoon, folks," and he said, "I brought snacks." His tone was conversational, the kind of casual greeting you might hear between coworkers. He held up the thermal bag as if offering lunch to a construction crew. The Council officers stared, their formal postures suddenly awkward against his everyday demeanor. His calm, casual demeanor was a weapon they couldn't counter. They had prepared for threats, for demands, for theatrical gestures of defiance. They had no protocol for a man who treated their flagship like a routine stop on his delivery route. He moved through the command center with the unassuming confidence of someone who belonged there, placing the thermal bag on a console as if it were a countertop. He politely asked to negotiate Earth's capitulation, disarming them with courtesy. His language was formal yet conversational, his tone suggesting a business transaction rather than a military surrender. He used their own diplomatic phrasing, mirroring their protocols while subtly subverting them. The command staff found themselves responding in kind, their war room posture softening into something resembling a corporate meeting. Then he pivoted. He cited galactic law, specifically the Treaty of Vorak Prime. His knowledge was precise, his references accurate. He quoted chapter and verse about sovereign territory and unlawful incursion. The Council's legal advisors began checking their databases, their expressions shifting from confusion to concern. He wasn't negotiating surrender. He was building a legal case. He informed them their unprovoked military action constituted an act of piracy under interstellar statutes. His tone remained polite, almost apologetic, as if pointing out an unfortunate oversight. He detailed the violations with the patience of someone explaining rules to newcomers. The command staff's confidence evaporated as they realized he was quoting their own laws back to them. Their weapons fire had created space debris, a violation of anti-littering statutes. He presented sensor data showing metal fragments and particulate matter drifting in near-Earth orbit. He referenced local environmental regulations about orbital cleanliness, framing their military operation as a littering offense. The absurdity of the charge hung in the air, but the documentation was thorough and technically accurate. He arrested the entire command staff not for invasion, but for littering. He produced actual printed citations from some terrestrial environmental agency, complete with case numbers and fine amounts. His demeanor never changed. He was still the polite delivery man, just one who happened to be serving legal papers. The council officers accepted the documents mechanically, their minds struggling to process the redefinition of their actions. They had come as conquerors and were being charged with creating space junk. Earth's response was a masterclass in bureaucratic warfare. They filed formal complaints with every agency imaginable, flooding the galactic administrative system with paperwork that seemed to multiply faster than it could be processed. I watched the document queues expand across multiple networks, each filing meticulously formatted according to the specific requirements of each receiving body. The humans had clearly studied galactic procedural protocols with intense focus, mastering the intricate details of interagency communication standards. Their approach was systematic, relentless, and perfectly calibrated to overwhelm through administrative rather than military means. The Intergalactic Court of Justice received detailed briefs on unlawful aggression, each document citing specific violations of established interstellar law. The filings referenced statutes and precedents the Council's legal team had assumed were too obscure for a newly contacted species to comprehend. They documented every weapons discharge, every orbital intrusion, every minor infraction with painstaking precision. The sheer volume of evidence was staggering. Sensor logs, atmospheric readings, even civilian eyewitness accounts cross-referenced with official naval records. Simultaneously, the Tribunal of Universal Rights documented violations of sentient rights. Compiling emotional impact statements from across the planet, they gathered testimony from children who had witnessed the ships, from elderly individuals whose sleep patterns were disrupted, from entire communities that had experienced what they termed invasion-related stress. The documents framed the military action as a psychological trauma event, complete with medical assessments and long-term impact projections. The Council found itself defending against charges of causing widespread emotional harm. Even the Better Business Bureau received a complaint, framing the invasion as a consumer fairness issue. The filing argued that the Council had engaged in deceptive practices by presenting themselves as advanced benefactors while actually being hostile conquerors. It cited false advertising precedents and requested an official review of the Council's ethical standing. The complaint included customer satisfaction surveys from affected populations, with comments like terrible customer service and showed up unannounced and tried to vaporize my cat. The Council's reputation was threatened by a liability lens they never anticipated. Their military analysts had prepared for technological countermeasures, not legal and bureaucratic ones. They found themselves responding to discovery requests and procedural motions instead of battle assessments. Their command staff spent more time consulting with lawyers than with tactical officers. Earth demanded reparations for emotional harm, environmental cleanup, and orbital repair. The damage bill was meticulous, itemized down to the credit. It included line items for psychological counseling services, atmospheric decontamination, and debris removal from near-Earth space. Each category contained sub-items with specific cost calculations: therapy sessions per capita, cleaning chemicals by the liter, salvage operations by the hour. The total was a multi-billion figure that looked suspiciously like a phone number, a numerical joke embedded in the seriousness of the document. The amount was large enough to be economically significant, yet structured in a way that felt deliberately provocative. The payment terms were listed as 30 days net, standard Earth business practice that treated the Galactic Council like any other commercial entity with outstanding debts. They leveraged galactic law to demand accountability, not submission. Their strategy transformed the conflict from a military engagement to a legal proceeding, forcing the Council to defend its actions in venues where technological superiority meant nothing. The humans had discovered that the most effective weapon against an advanced civilization wasn't a better warship, but a perfectly filed motion. The Council expected terms of surrender. They received an invoice. The document arrived through official diplomatic channels, formatted like a standard commercial bill from a terrestrial corporation. It featured a corporate logo, itemized charges, and payment instructions. The paper felt ordinary, the font commonplace, but the content was anything but routine. I watched the Council members handle the document with confusion, their usual confident postures giving way to uncertain gestures. They had prepared for negotiations about territorial concessions and military restrictions, not financial transactions. Line items included orbital debris removal and emotional distress compensation. Each entry contained detailed descriptions and cost calculations. The debris removal section listed fragments by size and composition, with per-unit pricing that seemed suspiciously precise. The emotional distress category included psychological evaluations from across the planet, with per capita charges that multiplied into staggering sums. The document treated trauma as a quantifiable expense, something that could be itemized and billed like any other service. Payment terms were listed as 30 days net, a common Earth business practice that treated the Galactic Council like any other commercial account. The fine print included standard late payment penalties and interest calculations. It specified acceptable payment methods, including interstellar wire transfers and verified currency exchanges. The formatting was relentlessly professional, using the same template humans used for utility bills and service invoices. The total was a number so large it seemed abstract, yet the formatting made it feel real. The figure stretched across the page with multiple commas and decimal points. It looked like the kind of amount that would require planetary scale accounting to process. The number of zeros seemed excessive, almost comical in its magnitude, yet the professional presentation gave it undeniable weight. It wasn't just a theoretical number, it was a demand for payment. It was a transactional reality, a bill for their arrogance. The document transformed their military campaign into a series of financial obligations. Every weapon fired, every ship deployed, every moment of orbital presence had been converted into monetary value. The humans had taken their show of force and processed it through accounting software. They had come as conquerors and were being treated as delinquent customers. The invoice included reminder notices for immediate payment and warnings about collection procedures. It referenced credit ratings and financial responsibility in language normally applied to businesses with cash flow problems. The Council found itself discussing payment plans rather than surrender terms. This reframing undercut their authority more completely than any military defeat. Their technological superiority meant nothing when facing a balance sheet. Their battle experience offered no advantage in negotiating payment schedules. The document reduced their entire invasion to a series of line items that needed to be settled. They were no longer victors. They were debtors. The invoice established a relationship of financial obligation that superseded military hierarchy. Commanders who had expected to be giving orders were now discussing interest rates and payment deadlines. The shift in status was humiliating in its completeness. Earth used commerce to push for a lasting settlement, not a temporary peace. The invoice included clauses about future cooperation and economic partnerships. It framed the resolution as a business arrangement rather than a military cessation. The document suggested that paying the bill would open doors to trade opportunities and cultural exchanges. It treated the conflict as a regrettable business misunderstanding that could be resolved through proper financial reconciliation. With the legal framework established, Martinez made his final move. He didn't demand their submission. He extended an invitation through the same diplomatic channels they'd used for the invoice. The message was simple, direct, and completely unexpected. I watched the council members receive the transmission, their expressions shifting from defensive readiness to puzzled curiosity. They had prepared for further legal demands or perhaps additional financial penalties, not this sudden shift in tone. Martinez's approach was neither hostile nor submissive. It was something entirely outside their experience. He asked the council to join a "We Didn't Get Conquered Day" celebration. The name itself was characteristic human wordplay, turning a military outcome into a communal event. The invitation listed parades, music performances, and cultural exhibitions across multiple cities. It described the event as an annual tradition, though no records indicated it had ever been celebrated before. The humans were inventing a holiday in real time, creating a framework for interaction that felt established and routine rather than unprecedented. He offered diplomacy through culture, cuisine, and shared experience. The invitation specified that council delegates would be guests of honor, with designated viewing areas and opportunities to interact with local populations. It framed the encounter as a cultural exchange rather than a political negotiation. The language focused on mutual understanding and shared experiences, avoiding any reference to the recent conflict beyond the celebration's name. A welcome package would include music, art, and food samples from Earth. The attachment listed specific items: digital access to musical archives, virtual museum tours, and a selection of culinary offerings. The choices represented diverse human cultures, rather than a single dominant tradition. The package was designed to showcase variety and creativity, not uniformity or dominance. He warned that some offerings might feel strange at first, a gentle approach to exchange. The message acknowledged cultural differences without presenting them as barriers. It treated unfamiliar experiences as opportunities for discovery, rather than challenges to overcome. This subtle framing encouraged openness while managing expectations about the novelty of human culture. This was soft power, an assertion of cultural strength rather than military force. The invitation demonstrated confidence without aggression, presenting Earth's identity as something to be explored rather than imposed. It shifted the balance from conqueror and conquered to host and guest, creating a completely different dynamic for interaction. The Council's response was silence, then a request for time to consider. The prolonged pause was telling. Their military advisors had no prepared response for a cultural invitation. Their diplomatic corps struggled to categorize this approach within existing frameworks. The request for consideration was itself a concession. They were engaging with the premise instead of rejecting it outright. It was a dramatic pivot from fear to potential friendship. The invitation redefined the entire relationship, offering a path forward that didn't require surrender or humiliation. It treated the conflict as a misunderstanding to be overcome through shared experience, rather than a contest to be won or lost. Earth reframed their victory as an invitation to be neighbors, not conquerors. The celebration concept established a new narrative about their place in the galactic community. It positioned humanity as willing participants in interstellar relations while maintaining their distinct identity and autonomy. The approach acknowledged the Council's presence while asserting Earth's right to define the terms of engagement. The micro-details of Earth's offer revealed its strategic gravity. A website appeared within hours of the invitation, built by someone named Tommy Chen. It wasn't a military platform or a diplomatic portal. It functioned as an appointment book for cultural exchange, with scheduling options for guided tours and interactive sessions. The design was utilitarian but effective, prioritizing function over aesthetics. I watched council aides struggle to navigate the interface, their confusion evident as they searched for traditional diplomatic protocols. The site offered drop-down menus for Maui, selecting cultural experiences and calendar, slots for virtual meetings. It wasn't a threat. It was an organizational tool that treated interstellar relations as a series of manageable appointments. The BBB review became a running joke among human communications, the one-star rating for the invasion circulating through their networks. Comments like, "Terrible customer service, would not recommend," and "showed up unannounced and tried to vaporize my cat," appeared across social platforms. The humor was specific, self-deprecating, and utterly disarming. This signaled a cultural shift where Earth asserted its identity through humor and normalcy. They weren't building weapons or fortifications. They were building channels for communication, creating infrastructure for dialogue rather than destruction. The website included FAQ sections about human customs, dietary preferences, and social norms. It offered translation services for basic phrases and cultural context for various gestures. The approach was practical, accessible, and completely unlike anything the Council had encountered. The Council's humiliation began to soften into curiosity. Their initial shock at being raided by a consumer protection agency gave way to genuine interest in the system itself. They started exploring the website's features, testing the scheduling functions, and even attempting to submit their own cultural information. The interface created a neutral space for interaction that their formal diplomatic channels lacked. They were confronted not with a foe, but with a potential trading partner. The website included sections for economic exchange proposals and technology sharing initiatives. It treated the relationship as a potential partnership rather than a hierarchy. The Council's economists began analyzing the implied market structures, while their cultural specialists studied the offered content. The impossible had become merely unfamiliar. What had seemed like incomprehensible behavior now appeared as a different approach to conflict resolution. The humans had taken a military confrontation and transformed it into an administrative process. Their methods were unconventional but increasingly understandable through the framework they provided. Earth used everyday infrastructure to turn a crisis into a teachable moment. The website became a living document of their cultural identity, updated constantly with new content and features. It included virtual museum tours, music samples, and culinary demonstrations. The council found themselves spending more time exploring these offerings than analyzing military tactics. The shift from warships to web pages represented a fundamental change in how interstellar relations could be conducted. The humans had demonstrated that sometimes the most powerful weapon was a well-designed scheduling system. The story's core irony consolidated in a small, quiet moment. Ambassador Krell 9, once humanity's fiercest critic, was offered a cup of coffee. The scene was simple. A standard meeting room aboard the Eternal Dominion, neutral ground between conflicting parties. The human liaison brought the beverage in a plain ceramic mug, steam rising in gentle curls. Krell 9's posture remained rigid, his facial tendrils coiled tight with suspicion. He had expected confrontation, demands, perhaps another legal maneuver. The offering seemed too ordinary, too mundane to be genuine. He hesitated, expecting a trick, a final humiliation. His eyes scanned the mug for hidden devices, his senses alert for chemical signatures. The council's medical staff had warned about Earth's unusual biochemistry. He recalled the garbage truck incident, the psychological warfare, the glitter-coated stealth ships. Every previous encounter had contained some element of deception or unconventional strategy. This apparent kindness felt like another layer of their complex tactical approach, but the gesture was genuine, a simple offering of hospitality. The human liaison remained still, making no attempt to pressure or persuade. He held the mug with relaxed hands, his expression neutral. The silence stretched, filled only by the faint hum of ship systems. Other council members watched from around the table, their own postures equally guarded. The moment became a miniature standoff, a test of intentions without words or weapons. He sipped the dark, bitter liquid. It was unfamiliar, complex. The temperature surprised him, hotter than most beverages his species consumed. The flavor profile was multifaceted, with earthy notes and a sharp acidity that lingered on his palate. His sensory receptors processed the compounds, finding no toxic elements but many unfamiliar organic molecules. The experience was alien yet not unpleasant, a complexity that demanded attention rather than rejection. His rigid posture softened slightly. The cosmic humiliation began to fade. The tension in his cranial tendrils unwound by degrees. He took another sip, this time with less hesitation. The warmth spread through his upper digestive tract, a sensation his people associated with comfort and safety. The simple act of sharing a beverage created a shift in the room's dynamics. The human liaison remained silent, allowing the experience to stand on its own. It was, he had to admit, pretty good. The words emerged without calculated thought, a spontaneous reaction to the sensory experience. His vocal modulator conveyed genuine appreciation rather than diplomatic politeness. The other council members exchanged glances, their own postures easing in response to his unexpected concession. The statement hung in the air, simple and undramatic yet profoundly significant. This small concession was more powerful than any victory parade. It represented a crack in the wall of certainty that had defined council policy toward Earth. The humans' willingness to offer hospitality without conditions, and Krell 9's willingness to accept it without suspicion, created a new pattern of interaction. The moment felt human in its simplicity, a shared experience that required no translation or explanation. Fear was being transformed into curiosity, and curiosity into potential cooperation. Other council members began asking questions about the beverage's origin and preparation. The human liaison explained the basic process of coffee cultivation and roasting, his descriptions factual and without embellishment. The conversation shifted from military strategy to agricultural practices, from confrontation to cultural exchange. The Haiishi felt different now, less like a negotiation and more like an introduction. Human hospitality proved to be a more effective weapon than any dreadnought. The coffee mug remained on the table between them, a simple object that had accomplished what fleets and weapons could not. It had created a moment of genuine connection, a pause in the predetermined narrative of conflict. The humans had understood that sometimes the most powerful statement is not a threat or a demand, but an offer to share something ordinary. The conversation continued, the bitterness of the coffee fading into a milder aftertaste, much like the tensions in the room. The final council session after the invasion was devoid of its usual theater. The chamber felt hollow without its typical displays of power and authority. The bioluminescent patterns that normally danced across delegates' forms were muted to faint glimmers. The telepathic whispers that usually flowed through crystalline conduits fell completely silent. I sat at my observation post, recording the absence of communication as intently as I usually recorded its presence. The council members maintained their positions, but their postures lacked the confidence that had defined previous gatherings. They seemed smaller somehow, diminished not by physical change but by conceptual collapse. They could only stare in shock at the data stream from Earth. The main holographic display showed real-time footage instead of tactical simulations or strategic assessments. The images were raw and unedited, conveying a reality that their processed intelligence reports had failed to capture. I watched their expressions as they processed the visual information, their features registering confusion, giving way to dawning comprehension. The certainty that had underpinned their decision-making was visibly crumbling. It showed their damaged ships being repaired by human crews, working alongside their own engineers. The footage revealed collaborative teams performing hull repairs on the dreadnoughts. Human technicians in practical work clothing passed tools to council engineers in their formal uniforms. The scene looked like any orbital maintenance operation, except for the unprecedented nature of the partnership. There were no guards standing watch, no weapons visible, no sense of occupation or coercion. The humans worked with focused efficiency, treating the advanced alien technology with respect but without awe. It showed children waving at shuttlecraft, not hiding from them. The camera panned to a schoolyard where young humans looked up at council transport vessels passing overhead. Their faces showed curiosity rather than fear, their gestures welcoming rather than defensive. Some held up handmade signs with colorful drawings of stars and ships. The image contrasted sharply with the council's expectations of panic and submission. The children's unaffected response suggested that the human population had already moved beyond the conflict phase. Their deep-seated biases had been confronted and shattered. The council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their physical movements mirroring their psychological discomfort. They had built their entire strategy on certain assumptions about primitive species, about technological progression, about the natural order of galactic civilization. Every piece of evidence now streaming before them contradicted those core beliefs. The foundation of their decision-making process was turning out to be fundamentally flawed. They had expected a primitive species to be simple, predictable. Their intelligence assessments had portrayed humanity as linear thinkers following an established technological path. They anticipated conventional military responses, standardized diplomatic protocols, understandable patterns of behavior. Their planning accounted for every possible variation of civilized warfare, every expected reaction from a species at Earth's developmental stage. Nothing in their extensive databases had prepared them for what actually occurred. They found a culture of limitless improvisation and strategic empathy. The humans had treated each challenge as a unique puzzle rather than a military engagement. Their solutions emerged from practical needs rather than theoretical doctrines. They demonstrated an ability to understand their opponent's perspective while maintaining their own identity. This combination of creativity and insight proved more effective than any weapon system the Council could deploy. They had not been conquered, but they had been fundamentally changed. The invasion had failed in its military objectives but succeeded in forcing a paradigm shift. The Council members were visibly processing this new reality, their expressions shifting from shock to contemplation. They were beginning to understand that the outcome represented not a temporary setback, but a permanent alteration of their worldview. The experience would necessarily influence all future interactions with newly contacted species. The Council was forced to see humanity not as a threat, but as a lesson. The delegates finally began to speak, their voices quiet and measured. The discussions focused on understanding rather than responding, on learning rather than countering. They analyzed the human approach not as a military tactic to be defeated, but as a cultural characteristic to be comprehended. This shift in perspective marked the true end of the conflict and the beginning of something new. Their stunned silence had given way to thoughtful conversation. Their humiliation transformed into genuine curiosity. The lesson wasn't about military triumph. It was about the power of unpredictable adaptation. The galaxy's most advanced force was defeated by a species that refused categorization. Humans didn't outperform their technology. They outthought their expectations at every turn. Their approach defied analysis because it emerged from necessity rather than doctrine. They treated each new challenge as a unique problem requiring an original solution, rather than applying established tactical principles. They turned garbage into weapons and laws into shields. I watched them repurpose municipal waste collection vehicles into olfactory weapon systems. Their legal teams transformed interstellar statutes into defensive barriers more effective than energy shields. Their strength lay in a philosophy that treated the impossible as a puzzle, not a barrier. This mindset allowed them to see opportunities where others saw only limitations. They approached advanced technology not with awe but with practical curiosity, asking what it could do rather than accepting what it was designed to do. The final lesson was a practical creed for a chaotic universe. Sometimes the best way to handle the impossible is to make friends with it and see what happens. This simple statement became their operational philosophy. It represented a fundamental shift from resistance to engagement, from confrontation to exploration. They didn't try to match the Council's technology. They learned to work around it, through it, and sometimes against it using completely unexpected methods. This mindset pivoted from threat to alliance, from fear to wonder. The humans demonstrated that adaptation wasn't about becoming stronger, but about becoming more flexible. Their victory emerged from their willingness to try things that made no tactical sense according to conventional wisdom. They achieved success by breaking patterns rather than following them, by creating new options rather than choosing from existing ones. Earth's victory was sealed by creating an irresistible normalcy. They made their presence feel inevitable rather than imposed. Their cultural offerings, their administrative systems, their very way of being became something the Council found themselves engaging with voluntarily. The humans didn't demand acceptance. They made themselves impossible to ignore and difficult to resist. Their approach was so thoroughly integrated into everyday reality that opposition seemed increasingly absurd. The Council's analysts eventually realized that human adaptability wasn't a tactic but a fundamental characteristic. It emerged from their planetary environment, their biological diversity, their cultural complexity. They had evolved to handle unpredictability as a constant condition rather than an occasional crisis. This gave them a natural advantage when facing any situation that defied conventional solutions. Their greatest weapon was their ability to reframe problems entirely. They didn't see a stealth ship. They saw something that might show up on weather radar. They didn't see a dreadnought. They saw a potential delivery destination. This cognitive flexibility allowed them to operate outside the constraints of military doctrine and technological hierarchy. They treated advanced technology as just another element in their environment rather than as an insurmountable advantage. The humans demonstrated that true innovation often comes from working with what you have rather than waiting for what you need. Their modifications to existing technology were rapid and practical, focused on immediate functionality rather than perfection. They prioritized effectiveness over elegance, results over methodology. This pragmatic approach allowed them to respond to threats faster than the Council could process their responses. Their victory ultimately came from understanding that sometimes the most powerful response to overwhelming force is to change the nature of the conflict entirely. They shifted the battle from military engagement to legal challenge, from technological competition to cultural exchange. By refusing to fight on the Council's terms, they forced the Council to engage on human terms. This redefinition of the conflict was their ultimate adaptation and their most effective weapon. The narrative arc was complete. It had moved from a declaration of war to a declaration of neighborliness. The shift felt both sudden and inevitable, a natural progression from confrontation to coexistence. I watched the transition unfold through official channels and informal communications, the tone shifting from hostile to hospitable without losing its essential character. The humans maintained their distinctive approach throughout, simply applying it to a different phase of interaction. Their consistency made the change feel genuine rather than tactical. The weapons were silent, replaced by the sounds of construction and conversation. Orbital repair teams worked alongside human engineers, their tools creating a new soundtrack of collaboration. Communication channels that had carried battle reports now transmitted technical specifications and cultural information. The change was audible in the ambient noise of diplomatic exchanges, the tense frequencies of conflict giving way to the practical tones of problem-solving. You could hear the difference in every transmission, every interaction. Earth had redefined the terms of contact on its own cultural terms. They didn't adopt galactic protocols or attempt to mimic council behaviors. They presented their ways of doing things as equally valid, their methods as worthy of consideration. This wasn't assimilation, it was integration with maintained identity. Their approach preserved human characteristics while creating space for council participation. The balance felt unconventional yet somehow appropriate for the situation. They offered friendship, but friendship on a foundation of mutual respect, not subjugation. The distinction was crucial and consistently maintained. Their invitations came with clear expectations of reciprocal consideration. They treated the council as equals despite the military outcome, refusing to leverage their advantage for domination. This approach created a different power dynamic, one based on voluntary engagement rather than forced compliance. The quality of the relationship mattered more than the hierarchy within it. The council's choice was no longer between conquest and retreat. Those options had been rendered irrelevant by the human approach. The binary thinking that had characterized their initial strategy no longer applied to the current reality. They faced a decision that required more nuanced consideration, more complex evaluation. The shift from military to diplomatic framing changed the nature of their deliberation completely. It was between isolation and joining a new, broader community. The humans presented membership as an opportunity rather than an obligation. Their invitation emphasized the benefits of participation while acknowledging the council's right to decline. This approach respected autonomy while making collaboration appealing. The decision became about values and vision, rather than security and survival. The stakes felt different when framed as inclusion rather than submission. The potential for mutual growth was now a tangible reality. Joint projects already showed promising results. Technical exchanges yielding innovations, cultural sharing revealing new perspectives. The collaboration demonstrated practical benefits beyond theoretical advantages. You could see the value emerging from the interaction, the ways both sides gained from the engagement. This measurable progress made continuing the relationship increasingly attractive. The story preserved a sense of wonder about first contact, done differently. It demonstrated that initial encounters didn't have to follow established patterns of conflict and domination. The human approach suggested alternative models for interstellar relations, methods that prioritized understanding over control. This expanded the possibilities for future interactions with other species. The example set a precedent that could influence galactic diplomacy for generations. The crisis became a pivot point toward a more stable galactic future. The resolution established new protocols for conflict prevention and cultural exchange. The framework created during the reconciliation process offered templates for handling future disagreements. The experience, while initially traumatic, ultimately strengthened the galactic community's capacity for peaceful coexistence. The humans had turned a potential catastrophe into an opportunity for systemic improvement. The Council's bill came due. The multi-billion credit invoice was a constant reminder of their failure, appearing in every financial system and administrative database they accessed. I watched the accounting teams process the numbers, their usual efficiency replaced by hesitant keystrokes. The document followed them like a shadow, referenced in budget meetings and strategic planning sessions. Its presence was inescapable, a perpetual acknowledgement of their miscalculation. The figure became part of their daily reality, a number that represented more than financial obligation. But the cost was more than financial. It was a cost to their identity. Their entire self-conception as an advanced civilization had been built upon certain assumptions about technological progression and military superiority. The invoice represented the collapse of those assumptions, the tangible evidence that their worldview was fundamentally flawed. I observed council members struggling with this conceptual shift, their confidence replaced by uncertainty, their certainty giving way to doubt. The psychological impact far exceeded the economic one. They had believed their technology made them invincible and their logic infallible. Their assessment systems had never failed them before. Their predictive models had always proven accurate. They trusted their scanners, their weapons, their tactical computers implicitly. The idea that a species with inferior technology could outmaneuver them seemed mathematically impossible. Their entire strategic framework was built upon the premise that advancement followed a predictable, measurable path. They learned that a species still using fossil fuels could weaponize ingenuity itself. The humans demonstrated that innovation wasn't about having better technology, but about using available resources more creatively. Their solutions emerged from practical necessity rather than theoretical superiority. They treated their technological limitations as features rather than flaws, working within constraints to achieve unexpected results. This approach defied the Council's understanding of progress and capability. Their deepest bias, that advancement was a linear path, was proven false. The humans didn't follow the expected trajectory from fossil fuels to clean energy to quantum technology. They mixed and matched, creating hybrid systems that combined old and new in ways that made no sense according to established developmental models. Their technological ecosystem was messy, inefficient, and brilliantly effective. It represented a completely different philosophy of progress. Humanity's eclectic, comedic warfare philosophy was a form of intelligence they lacked. The Council's strategic thinking was serious, systematic, and predictable. The humans treated conflict as a creative exercise, applying humor and misdirection as tactical tools. Their approach valued surprise over power, adaptability over consistency. This represented a cognitive style the Council had never encountered and couldn't effectively counter. It wasn't just a different strategy, it was a different way of thinking about problems. They paid for the orbital cleanup, for the emotional harm, for the repairs. The financial transactions were processed through standard banking protocols, the funds transferring from Council accounts to Earth-based financial institutions. The payments were made on schedule, with proper documentation and accounting trails. The process was professionally handled, bureaucratically correct, and utterly humiliating. Each credit transferred represented another concession, another acknowledgement of their failure. But the true price was their certainty. The Council lost its unshakable confidence in its own superiority. Its members began questioning long-held assumptions about technology, about civilization, about the nature of advancement. This conceptual shift was more damaging than any financial loss, more transformative than any military defeat. It forced them to reconsider their place in the universe, their understanding of progress, their very identity as an advanced species. Their catastrophic failure was a lesson in the danger of underestimating an adversary's ingenuity. The experience taught them that technological superiority alone couldn't guarantee victory, that established protocols couldn't account for creative thinking, that confidence could become a vulnerability. They learned to look beyond surface appearances, to consider possibilities outside their experience, to respect approaches that defied conventional wisdom. The lesson was expensive, painful, and ultimately necessary for their continued relevance in a changing galactic community. What emerged from the wreckage was fragile, unprecedented. The peace that followed the invasion wasn't imposed through force, but emerged from a complex process of mutual reevaluation. I watched the transition unfold from my observation post, documenting the subtle shifts in protocol and communication. The atmosphere in the Council chamber felt different, less certain, more open to possibility. The usual displays of power were replaced by practical discussions about implementation and cooperation. The change was visible in every interaction, every decision, every carefully worded communique. It was a rules-based reconciliation, not a victor's peace. The humans had insisted on using existing galactic legal frameworks rather than creating new terms through military dominance. They referenced established treaties and statutes, building their case on precedents rather than power. This approach gave the settlement legitimacy beyond mere force dynamics. The agreement felt more substantial because it was grounded in recognized principles rather than temporary advantage. I noted how this method created stability where conquest would have bred resentment. Earth was now a potential ally, its status negotiated from a position of strength. The humans hadn't sought to dominate or humble the Council. They had simply demonstrated their capacity to defend themselves while offering partnership. Their position was firm but not aggressive, confident without being arrogant. They treated the Council as equals despite the military outcome, creating a foundation for genuine cooperation. This balance of strength and willingness to collaborate made them unexpectedly attractive as allies. The corridor of negotiation Martinez opened was grounded in law, not force. His initial arrest of the command staff for littering had established a pattern of using legal frameworks rather than weapons. This approach continued throughout the peace process, with human diplomats citing specific statutes and precedents for every proposal. They treated interstellar relations as a system of rules and agreements, rather than a contest of power. This legalistic approach gave their positions undeniable legitimacy. This reframing ensured the peace would be lasting, because it was structured. The agreement contained mechanisms for dispute resolution, regular review processes, and clear consequences for violations. It wasn't based on trust or goodwill alone, but on enforceable provisions and mutual interest. The framework was comprehensive enough to handle future challenges while flexible enough to accommodate change. I observed Council legal teams studying the structure with genuine admiration for its thoroughness. It was a peace built on the Council's acceptance of human equality. The most significant shift wasn't in the treaty terms, but in the underlying attitudes. Council members had to acknowledge that humanity belonged in the galactic community, not as subordinates but as peers. This recognition changed the fundamental nature of the relationship, transforming it from hierarchical to collaborative. The change was visible in how delegates addressed human representatives, with respect rather than condescension. They had to acknowledge that a pizza delivery driver could be a galactic hero. Martinez's role in the conflict challenged their deepest assumptions about status and capability. His effectiveness demonstrated that human worth wasn't determined by conventional metrics of advancement or position. This realization forced a broader reconsideration of how they evaluated other species. The Council began developing new assessment protocols that looked beyond technological indicators. This acceptance was the foundation for everything that followed. Trade agreements, cultural exchanges, and scientific collaborations all built upon this basic recognition of human equality. The relationship developed depth and complexity because it started from a place of mutual respect. I watched joint projects emerge that neither side could have accomplished alone, each benefiting from the other's strengths and perspectives. The potential for future conflict remained, but the paradigm had shifted. Disagreements would now be handled through established channels rather than military posturing. The framework created mechanisms for addressing tensions before they escalated into confrontations. This didn't eliminate the possibility of conflict, but it changed how such conflicts would be managed and resolved. The new approach prioritized dialogue over deployment, negotiation over intimidation. A fragile peace was born from a confrontation with bias and a choice for cooperation. The humans had forced the Council to see beyond its preconceptions, to recognize value in unexpected places. The resulting relationship was careful, tentative, but genuinely promising. It represented a new model for interstellar relations, one based on understanding rather than domination, on collaboration rather than control. The peace felt earned rather than imposed, making it stronger than any victory could have achieved. The video's title finds its moment at the end. Captain Martinez stands before the subdued Council in their own chamber. The usual bioluminescent displays are dark, the telepathic network silent. The Council members sit with postures that reveal their defeat, shoulders slumped, cranial tendrils motionless, eyes avoiding direct contact. The room feels different now, the authority and confidence drained from it like atmosphere from a breached hull. Martinez stands at the center, his posture relaxed but his expression serious. His tone is cold, not with anger, but with the clarity of someone stating a simple fact. There's no emotion in his voice, no theatrical emphasis. He speaks with the flat certainty of someone reading a weather report or stating a fundamental law of physics. The lack of dramatic inflection makes the words land harder, more effectively. The Council members seem to shrink slightly under the weight of his calm delivery, their elaborate formal attire suddenly looking like costumes rather than symbols of power. "You invaded Earth?" he asks, the question hanging in the air. The words are simple, the syntax straightforward, yet they carry immense weight. The question isn't delivered as a challenge or a threat. It's posed with almost clinical detachment, as if confirming data points in an official report. The silence that follows feels heavy, tangible, as if the air itself has thickened around them. I watch the council members process the question, their facial expressions shifting through phases of recognition and acceptance. It isn't an accusation. It's a request for confirmation of their shared, absurd reality. Martinez isn't seeking information. He already knows the answer. He's asking them to acknowledge what they've all experienced, to verbalize the collective failure that has brought them to this moment. The question forces them to confront the gap between their intentions and the actual outcome, between their confidence and the reality of their defeat. It makes them participants in their own judgment. The council can only stare in shock, their arrogance finally spent. Their usual confident postures have vanished, replaced by the slumped shoulders and downcast eyes of beings who have been thoroughly humbled. The bioluminescent patterns that normally dance across their skin remain utterly still, their communication system silent. They look at Martinez, then at each other, then at the polished floor of their chamber. No one speaks, no one moves. The silence stretches, becoming its own form of response. They have no answer, because the answer is written in their own defeat. The evidence surrounds them, the damaged ships being repaired in orbit, the financial obligations they've accepted, the legal agreements they've signed. Their inability to respond speaks louder than any admission could. The facts of their failure are so comprehensive, so undeniable, that words would only diminish them. Their silence acknowledges what their pride cannot verbalize. The question itself is the final verdict on their actions. Martinez doesn't need to elaborate or explain. The simple inquiry contains everything that needs to be said about their miscalculation, their arrogance, their defeat. It summarizes the entire conflict in 3 words, reducing their grand invasion plan to its essential failure. The question hangs in the air, complete and unanswerable, a judgment that requires no additional commentary. It encapsulates the entire humiliation, the entire comedy of errors. The garbage trucks, the flour and glitter, the pizza delivery approach, all of it contained in that simple question. The Council's technological superiority, their military might, their centuries of advancement, all rendered meaningless by those 3 words. The question doesn't just address their failure, it defines it, frames it, makes it undeniable. His question forces them to confront the full consequence of their miscalculation. They must now face not just the practical outcomes, the repairs, the payments, the legal obligations, but the conceptual collapse of their worldview. Their understanding of power, of advancement, of civilization itself has been proven inadequate. The question makes them acknowledge that their entire framework for evaluating other species was fundamentally flawed. This realization is more damaging than any material loss, more transformative than any military defeat. It represents a permanent change in how they will view themselves and their place in the universe. Earth's victory demonstrated where true strength actually lies. It's not in superior technology or military doctrine, it's in unconventional thinking, the ability to see solutions where others only see limitations. The Council's rigid protocols were defeated by human ingenuity that refused to be categorized.